Okay, so problems 1 and 2 we'll do in the same video. Find the class boundaries, midpoint, and width of the class from 23 to 33. So this is an interval, a class from a grouped frequency distribution. And if we're going through a set of values, we're choosing every value between 23 and 33. And we're creating tallies, we're getting frequencies, and we're calculating from there. But to find the class boundaries, so if we're looking at a group frequency distribution, right? Well, we might have 23 to 33 as one of our classes. The next class might be 34 to 44, right? That might be our next class. And then 45 to 55 might be our next class, etc., 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 right? If I'm tallying these values, you see there's a gap between 33 and 34. One of my values might be a decimal, might be 33.4, right? And I can't account for that with these intervals as they're set, with these classes as they're set. So in order to counteract that, we calculate these class boundaries to make sure that we can have an interval that contains all of those extra values. In order to do that, I'm going a little bit less than 23 and a little bit more than 33. How much more? How much less? Exactly 0.5. So for the boundaries, for 23 to 33, if I subtract 0.5 from 23, I get 22.5. That's 23 minus 0.5. To get the upper boundary, I add 0.5 to 33, so 33.5. So that's my new boundary. That's my class boundary. Same here. 34 to 44, I subtract 0.5, so 33.5. On the right, the upper boundary, I add 0.5, so 44.5. That's how I calculate my class boundaries. Same here. Subtract 0.5, so 44.5, add 0.5. So for this specific problem, we're talking about this row here, right? But I just wanted to show for the other rows. Those are my boundaries. So for the midpoint now, you can calculate the midpoint in two ways. You can either use the class limits, these here, or you can use the class boundaries. Either or will give you the same midpoint. To find the midpoint, take the upper plus the lower, and you divide by 2. That's the midpoint. So I can use the class limits. The upper, 33 plus 23 divided by 2. 33 and 23, that's 56. Divided by 2, that's 28. My midpoint. Or I can use the boundaries. 22. Oh, oops. That's not the right one. Let's be consistent, right? Upper plus the lower, divide by 2. Add these together, 33.5 plus 22.5, that should be 56. Divide by 2, I still get 28. Right, so 28 lies right in the middle of this class boundary. 28 lies right in the middle of these class limits. That's my midpoint. Now to find the width of that class, you have to use the boundaries to find the width. Well, yeah. We'll use the boundaries to find the width. I think it's the most straightforward way to do that. To find the width, so we're using the boundaries, right? You especially have to use the boundaries if you only have one interval. If you have more than one interval, there's other ways you can do it, but if I just have this one interval, the best way to do it is using the boundaries. So using the boundaries, I do the upper boundary minus the lower boundary using these values here. So 33.5 is the upper boundary, the larger value, minus the smaller. 33.5 minus 22.5 is 11. That's the width of that interval. The other way you can think about doing it is, see when I did this here, I have multiple intervals. If you take the lower limit of one interval minus the lower limit of the interval before it, and subtract those, you'll still get that 11. 34 minus 23 is 11. Or you can take the upper limits, subtract them, you'll still get 11. So if you have multiple intervals, you can just subtract the corresponding upper or lower limits if you're using that. So we're doing the same exact procedure for number 2, the class boundaries for this class here. Okay, now this one is interesting because the class limits are 16.3 and 18, right? 16.3 to 18. So this is a decimal here. So the way to calculate the boundaries is slightly different, right? So for the first, to find the boundaries, I subtract 0.5 and add 0.5. Right? Subtract 0.5 from the lower limit, add 0.5 to the upper limit. If either your limits are a decimal, I'm going to do it a little differently here. So for 16.3, I will subtract 0.05. Subtract 5 hundredths instead of 5 tenths. Okay, so 16.3 minus 0.05 is 16.25. And for 18, for the upper limit, I'm going to add the same value that I subtracted, 5 hundredths. So this becomes 18.05. And that's my new boundary. That's my boundary. 16.25 to 18.05. For the midpoint, I will calculate that the exact same way, upper plus lower divided by 2. I can use either the class boundaries or the class limits. Let's show both. 18 plus 16.3 divided by 2. It's 34.3 divided by 2. That's 17.15. If I use the boundaries, 18.05 plus 16.25 divided by 2, that's still 34.3 over 2, which is 17.15. There's my midpoint. And the width. Again, I'm going to be using the boundaries and subtract 18.05 minus this dash here is for the interval, and this dash here is subtraction. Subtract 18.05 minus 16.25, and that's 1.8. That's the width